Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Data Privacy Insights, Leveraging Privacy Data to Drive Compliance and Consumer Trust. I'm Scott Pister, a Senior Consultant with Revgen Partners, and I will be one of the presenters today, along with Nasser Musafar, a manager at Revgen Partners with over 15 years experience in data analytics and technology implementation work. Revgen has worked with multiple Fortune 100 clients implementing and supporting data privacy program development. Today, we'll focus on how a performance management solution enables a company's data privacy program to achieve its full potential by meeting legislative compliance, creating consumer trust, and driving operational efficiencies. This presentation is one of a number of resources on our website, providing thought leadership and strategies to meet the increasing number of new data privacy laws in the US and abroad. We've got a lot to cover today, so I'll get us started with the agenda. Let's take a look at the topics we will be addressing today. We'll start off by providing an overview of data privacy, defining what it is and the impact facing businesses today. We will then review how the privacy laws can affect a business, while also taking a look at the current state of data laws across the United States. From there, Nasser will get into the heart of the presentation by focusing on the best performance indicators to measure a privacy program and the operational insights that can be derived from a performance management solution. From there, I'll be back to talk through a use case of privacy performance management, as well as the areas of opportunity to reduce operational costs that Revgen has seen through customer engagements and market research before wrapping up the presentation. Let's start by providing a baseline of what data privacy is and why organizations should care about it. Revgen defines data privacy as the proper handling of data based on its classification, application, and level of importance. On the left, we'll walk through the three key considerations for data privacy. An organization start off by considering how the data is being used, processed, stored, and protected. This means understanding how data is being used by various business units within the organization. It also means having a robust governance program in place to safeguard access to the data. Data privacy also includes understanding how this data is being collected. Is the organization buying marketing data or consumers providing information via opt-ins on your website, or is it transactional financial data? Finally, data privacy means understanding how the data is shared within and beyond the organization. This covers internal controls for data movement, as well as sharing with third parties or even data that is sold. In a world of increasing data, the ability of an organization to control and understand these processes has become increasingly important in this age of nearly unlimited data. So that's a quick overview of what data privacy is, so why should we care about it? Governments have begun to enact legislation to promote data, to protect data, as consumers are now more concerned with how their data is being used. You'll notice the research finding at the top of the slide. Gartner has projected by 2023 that 65% of the world's population will have a personal information covered under modern privacy regulations. For those organizations with strong data governance programs, they are positioning themselves to avoid unnecessary costs and have the potential to generate revenue. Let's talk through those financial reasons on the right that show why organizations should care about the privacy data. The first reason is one of cost avoidance, as there are financial penalties directly tied to legislation. The financial penalty for the recently enacted CCPA is $7,500 per individual violation. Financial penalties are very common in order to garner the attention of corporations. Next, we have lawsuits from data mishandling, as seen in the case of Yahoo, where 3 billion accounts were leaked. It ended up costing Yahoo hundreds of millions of dollars in addition to brand reputation and loss of consumer trust. But it's not all bad news. Those companies that have a robust and controlled process may have opportunities to monetize their data by selling to third parties. Some organizations have done this very well by setting up proper frameworks to guard this data, while others have not done as well, jeopardizing their sustainable revenue streams. Let's move on to review the current state of data privacy in the United States. We created an illustration of legislative adoption across the US. California's CCPA garnered most of the attention in 2019 and 2020, but there are 24 other states that have or are in process of enacting their own policies. It's not just new policies that will affect businesses either. CPRA contains a set of 20 additional requirements that are put in on top of CCPA. This is to say that state legislation will continue to be fluid and will require ongoing management. With continued state adoption, there will also be potential for federal privacy law down the road. While small businesses will need to understand the policies of their own states, national enterprises must have comprehensive solutions to meet the requirements of all states that they operate in. As you can see, Data privacy is not going anywhere and will require organizations to invest time and money to meet privacy legislative requirements. Now that we've laid the framework of what data privacy is and the growing trend among privacy legislation being implemented across the United States, let's shift gears to the strategies of unlocking the value of a privacy program. Here we have laid out the life cycle of a privacy program in which the legislative requirement is to deliver an output file to the consumer, as seen on the right side. The consumer in the bottom left corner of the slide is seeking personal information from the enterprise via an online portal or voice channels. The organizations must work to find the information scattered across the departments, then aggregate the data through a unified process, and return it to the consumer via an output file. There are a number of variables in play for this company's process. They're dealing with an external consumer contacting the company, the need to find specific and personal data across the different databases and sources, aggregate, and send it back to the consumer. With all this movement, how can organizational leaders monitor and improve the process? We believe the business intelligence solution is the key to unlocking value. Not unique to privacy, the first step in any data process is determine what problem needs to be solved. In this case, it's providing specific and personal data for the consumer. Once it's determined what problem needs to be solved, we must determine performance metrics to monitor, control, and track actions across the workflow. A performance management program will show areas of inefficiency that can be approved in order to limit rework, ensure compliance with legislation, and drive down operational costs. Visibility is key to analyzing this data of the program. We'll continue to tease this out as we dive into the specific KPIs and insights of a data privacy program. Performance metrics have been around a long time. Data privacy is no different. To run programs efficiently, business intelligence is needed to ensure success. What is unique about data privacy is the increased level of care and control needed given the sensitivity of the information. A consumer may be upset if their order history is leaked, but they're guaranteed to be upset if their credit card and social security data is mishandled and leaked. So why do metrics matter? A recent survey found that only 4% of companies concluded they have the right resources to draw meaningful insights from data and act on them. When it comes to data privacy programs, taking action is the requirement. It goes on to say 2/3 of companies lack the technology and over 50% do not have the capabilities to develop insights. These are issues that must be solved in order to legally operate a privacy program. Accessing data is the primary goal that a process must solve. On the other hand, the organizations that can locate, compile, and harness data properly are the most likely to be successful when it comes to financial performance, executing decisions, and making decisions faster. While business intelligence is not a new concept, the order of magnitude is so much greater when it comes to privacy, and that you're dealing with the most personal and important information about a person. From here, I'll hand it off to Nasser, and he'll dive into the process for identifying the most important metrics and drawing insights when it comes to a data privacy program.
Thank you for the introduction, Scott. As Scott has mentioned, I'm going to be talking through the creation of the operational reporting and insights to drive efficiencies. Before I really start delving into this topic, I do want to reiterate that really you enter this stage once you have already gotten to the point where you can actually have the whole system stood up. So you want to make sure that you want to be able to get the request. The request has been sent to all the various business units within that organization, and that the information from that request has been compiled. Scott had mentioned that 2 slides before. I just wanted to call it. That was a really important step that you need to first meet in order to really drive through some of this reporting. Also want to reiterate that the top priority for a privacy reporting is really first and foremost to make sure you adhere to the legislation, that you're compliant. The icing on the cake really is to getting some of those metrics, to getting some of those efficiencies and to squeezing those out to making the whole process cheaper and to driving positive customer experience. So with that in mind, what we really want to start off with defining those key metrics. And so what I'm going to do is I'll talk through at a very high level the first 3 steps, and we'll dive into each step progressively. So that first, the defining key metrics, that really is a function of both the legislation and the industry. For example, if you were using healthcare, you'd have HIPAA as opposed to financial services where you may have FCRA or CCPA. And so really that's keeping that in mind, that you've got your key metrics that are going to be very very specific towards legislation and the industry. Once you do that, you've got actually the developing of the reporting and insight solution. So that's really going to be, once you have all this data, how do you actually present that data? How do you actually make sense of it and actually use that data? Having data just for the sake of data really helps no one. And so it's really getting that reporting. And then lastly, it's really once you've got that reporting up and running, it's really understanding that reporting, squeezing out all the efficiencies, and really gleaming insights from that reporting itself. So with that in mind, the next slide, what we've got is really talking through the key metrics. So what we've got right here is an example of a client where we stood up a CCPA project. And what I'll do here is walk through some of the main components on this slide, and then we'll dig into each of these pieces on the subsequent slides. The first thing to notice is really the granularity of the data. And so what I mean by that is you'll notice how we've got that January, February, March, we got it at a month level, which is great for an executive. However, it may not be enough information for someone that's doing more operational type of reporting, really, in the day-to-day activities. So that's the first thing. Next thing is these metrics, as I mentioned earlier, that want to make sure that it's specific to the industry and the legislation. And so you'll notice on the top left corner, ensuring compliance with legislation. So in this example right here, you notice we've got an intake 1 and intake 2. Really, the reason why that's important is because legislation dictated that there were going to be multiple means for a person to make a request. And in this example, we've got a website, and we've also got a phone service, the IVR, or the interactive voice response. So you'll see that the next piece is really understanding the intake channels. So again, that's going to be drilling into the website and IVR and understanding where is the fallout. So where is it where a person starts the process to where they end, and really each of the steps in between. And the big call out here is the verification. It's to verify that, if I say I'm Nasser, I am who I say I am, and I can prove that, and kind of going through those steps and walking through and really being able to use metrics to say, hey, we had 100 people that started and only 20 people ended, and this is where each person kind of fell out in that process. Next piece is going to be understanding your consumers. It was important for, sorry, you can go back for a second there. So it's really understanding the types of consumers you've got. This was important for the client itself, is because they really wanted to know if there were certain things they could do to make some adjustments on education. Was there certain things that, active customers versus former customers were more sensitive towards? And so just understanding the consumer. The next piece was really understanding the quality control and understanding kind of where the fallout is. We'll talk through just why this was important, but really for most organizations, the quality control can become one of the most expensive parts of the whole program because of the rework, the actual manual pieces involved with actually reviewing and then reprocessing. Again, the last piece is the whole completion of the process. So it's understanding of my consumers or the people that are making requests, the requesters, how many of those are getting denied? How many of those requests are either access for requests or deletion of information? And how are our consumers actually using it? Are they viewing it? Are they downloading it? Again, this helps us to glean a little bit of insight as far as the whole customer experience. So if we go to the next slide, what we've got right there is really taking this information. And you'll notice first thing is that our granularity has changed. So the prior slide had January, February, March, had a month level grain, whereas this right here, we've got a day level. So you'll notice here, we're broken apart the last couple of days, the last week, for example, in March. Again, this is helpful for a different audience. This is going to be someone who's actually going to be doing more of the operational and kind of leading that operations, as opposed to someone that needs to be at the 50,000 or 100,000 foot level, just needs to have a very high level of what's going on. So you'll see here, as I mentioned earlier, that the inputs, and really the first piece here is the legislation that's driving this. So legislation dictated that we got to have multiple channels, and you'll notice again, we've got phone call, website. We've got, giving visibility to the channel usage. Again, this was important because some channels may require different levels of investment, different levels of staffing. For example, a website, once you have it up and running, it was scalable. Whereas the IVR, you would have to put more resources into it if you did notice an uptick in volume, whether that's with seasonality or whether that was with a particular type of customer. It was important for the client to keep track of what that volume looked like so that they could be ahead of the game as far as being able to staff accordingly. You also notice that you've got the verification on the channel type. So again, this was important because legislation required the client to actually provide metrics on that if needed and reporting on that if needed. So this was more of a regulatory requirement where they had to provide each of the fallout points for a website request and an IVR request. So again, like I said, a lot of these metrics are going to be dictated by your legislation first and foremost, and then there's going to be ways to really extract efficiencies. So this is more along the lines of the legislation. If you go to the next slide, what we've got there is a bit more as far as processing, and this is non-legislation, more around what the client was looking for in terms of understanding their customers. One of the first things you'll notice, again, along with the grain of the data, is that the customers have been segmented into 3 different buckets, if you will. You've got an active or a current customer, former customer, and a never customer. The reason this was important for the organization to understand that makeup is because that directly impacted the level of effort it would take to actually comply for a request for access or for a request for delete. And the reason for that is if you had a person that was a current customer, you're going to have a lot more data on them than someone who is a never customer, and you may have a few data points such as marketing information. So it's important for them to understand the trends for that, because they could also staff accordingly. And so again, understanding your customer, understanding if there's seasonality, understanding kind of the different aspects of who's making it and when is important for them to match up resources to the requests. It was also important to understand the types of requests that are made. So you'll notice here that we've broken that apart into requests to delete and request to view data. The CCPA legislation required for a request for delete, it was simply sending a email back to the consumer or back to the requester, either validating that they requested, that they deleted that data, or it was not deleted. So it was less of an effort than for a request for access, where that request for access required every business unit submitting all of the information they had, all the PI they had on an individual, taking all that information and deduplicating it, taking it and taking out all the sensitive piece of information. There was a lot more work effort involved with that request for access, which is why this was something that the client really tracked that really carefully as far as from a day-to-day grain perspective. The next piece that we've got is, we've talked about the inputs, we've talked about the processing. Next slide is really about the quality control process. And I'd mentioned earlier with the quality control, the reason this is important is this was probably the most expensive portion once the program was up and running. Reason for that is this particular client had 30 different business units. Those 30 business units each got a request when there was a request for information, request for access information. They would take that information, put it into a flat file, and all of that information would be compiled by IT, who would then take another pass to deduplicate that, to take all that information and basically put it in a presentable format. And if the QC process found that there was an issue with either the wrong information being sent to the wrong person, or if it was information should be redacted, such as a social security number or password, that would start the whole process again. So essentially you'd have a person actually doing the QC process and then flagging if there was an issue. And if there was an issue, you could potentially have all 30 business units having to go and reprocess it again. So the reason that was so expensive is obviously just, it took a lot of time. It took a lot of energy, and a lot of that was manual, because the second process would be put under much more scrutiny to make sure those same issues weren't brought up again, which is why we're tracking the velocity to see just if we're increasing the number of QC failures, to understand just what percentage of total volume we're getting failures. And so again, this was important to really squeeze out each bit of efficiency and to try to identify issues in the whole process before they became real issues and costed significant money to the client. Go to the next slide. Last piece is really the output. So this was important, not because of legislation, but really to understand what customers, what type of requests are being made. And so you'll see here, we've got if it's a delete access as well as denied invalid requests. So depending on the legislation, you'll have a segment of your population that are eligible to make a request, a segment that's not eligible. It was important for the client to really track what individuals are having invalid requests so that they could actually get a little bit of insight to see where some potential issues may arise as far as, where do people have questions as far as their data is concerned, as well as just understanding are these legitimate denials. That's another thing that they could potentially be audited for. And so it was very important for them when they got a request for denial, they actually went through and really made sure that it was a valid request that was denied, or it was an invalid request that was denied. There was a reasoning behind that request. So you'll see really what we're trying to track here is understanding the volume and trend of those denials, to track the final product to the requester. And so what I mean by that is if it was a delete or an access is the whole information, or was it just an email getting sent out, as well as how is the consumer using it? So, was it a viewing of information? Is it downloading of information? Again, that's going to be important because there's a certain amount of work associated with each of those, with those views and downloads. And it was important to understand how those consumers are using that information. And so you'll see the metrics that we've got here is, denied requests, the type of requests that were completed, files sent to consumers. Again, this was dictated by the client and trying to eke out more of the efficiencies as opposed to a legislation perspective. Now that we've talked about some of these metrics, the next slide is really going to go into, what do you do with all of this data? And so, it's taken all of this data. It's important to really understand who's going to be consuming that, understand your audience. And so if you notice that very first slide where I had the January, February, March, I had that high level of grain. That's going to be more for a higher level person as opposed to someone that's going to be more operational. That's got that day level information in there. And so, understanding that and understanding visually, how are you going to use that? A lot of times with your senior executives, they're not going to want to have a big tabular view. They're going to want to know the information at a high level and, having that represented pictorially. And that's what we've got right here is where it makes sense for most organizations will have a BI tool already in place, whether it's, in this example, it's Tableau, but it could be, Power BI, ClickView, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really leveraging that information and leveraging that tool that you've got to really present it in a manner that's going to be impactful. And there really is no need to bring up a new tool or to introduce a new tool to a tool set. It really is best practice to use the tools that's already there to eliminate some of that learning curve, to really speed up the process of getting those visualizations, getting that impact to really see those benefits. So with that in mind, I'm going to kick it back to Scott, who's going to talk about some of the case studies that we've done over at Revgen.
Thank you, Nasser, for walking us through the key performance management indicators in this privacy program. So these recommendations were influenced by Revgen's experience working on a data privacy program implementation project, as Nasser alluded to. So Revgen worked with a Fortune 100 communication service provider to develop their privacy program to meet the requirements of CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. Per the legislation, consumers have the right to request access to or delete their data within the organization. The challenges of this business may sound familiar, as it is a common data privacy challenge. Consumers needed the ability to access their information, but the infrastructure and performance management framework within the organization needed to be improved in order to find, acquire, track the flow of data across the business. There were legislative requirements on timing and security that must be met, and Revgen's solution entailed an automated record processing platform, as well as a robust performance management solution to drive the operational insights from the program. So each point of interaction and data transfer was carefully monitored and optimized. The process improvement from the operational insights produced our desired outcomes of safeguarding the consumer trust, finding processes inefficiencies, and meeting compliance standards. So as a reminder, a privacy program is typically not a revenue generator, but a cost center. Legislative compliance is always the #1 goal, but operational cost management soon follows. We'll address a few examples of notable operational insights that can be targeted to drive down operational costs and unlock additional value within a privacy program. The first is consumer channel usage. Depending on the legislation, organizations may have to establish multiple intake channels for consumer requests. Taking best practices from your organization's marketing and operational teams, understanding and funneling consumers to the most efficient intake channel needs to be a priority. Self-serve and online formats tend to be the best choices, as higher cost channels like IVR and live agents can be up to 12 times more expensive. Including interactive knowledge bases will also allow self-supporting customers to find answers to their questions quickly and reduce the number of touch points within the business. Area #2 is creating automated processes. The challenge of data privacy is extracting information across the business. In a large organization, this can mean needing to extract data from 20+ business units. Developing the architecture and process to extract this data to a centralized source and reducing the manual work could save up to $1 million in operational costs, primarily due to headcount. Finally, there's an opportunity to reduce costs from quality control and rework costs. These can quickly get out of control in a data privacy program without safeguards in place. Releasing sensitive data to the wrong person most importantly impacts consumer trust, but also generates substantial rework costs. Based on our experience and research, it can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars annually without continuous monitoring and process improvement. So to recap, data privacy laws present a number of challenges as this organization program processes. The core tenet of meeting legislation lies in a robust and for the health and efficiency of the program. Performance management unlocks the ability of the organization to meet its goals for data privacy. First and foremost, it will provide guardrails to ensure legislative compliance by tracking the throughput of the process and adherence to the law. Second, although data privacy is not a revenue-generating activity, it does present significant financial risk for businesses that do not adhere to regulations. Ensuring the response or action is being tracked and met reduces the financial risk. Audit resilience is also strengthened. A performance management solution can provide the information needed to support audits and legal inquiries. Next, we have consumer trust. As we stated throughout this presentation, data privacy has become top of mind for consumers. Performance management ensures data governance and protecting consumer trust by measuring the process. Finally, we walk through in detail the areas of opportunity that exist in operational fine-tuning. Metrics show actionable bottlenecks, data and consumer dropout points. All of these desired outcomes are enabled through a performance management solution. So I'll wrap up this presentation by providing a quick overview of Revgen Partners. Revgen is a business and technology consulting firm based out of Denver, Colorado, helping clients navigate today's disruptive business environment. At Revgen, we work with clients from all industries and sizes, from mid-market up to Fortune 50. Our core areas of expertise include analytics and insights, customer experience, and digital enablement. We view data privacy at the intersection of these three, as each area is critical to build a comprehensive program to adhere to data privacy laws. Our values of respect, integrity, stewardship, and enjoyment are critical to our success, so we seek to partner with our clients to solve their business challenges while empowering those involved. So we thank you for joining us today. Here at Revgen Partners, we'd be happy to discuss ways we can assist your organization in your data privacy project needs. Please check out the other privacy content and resources on our website. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to Nasser or myself. Thank you and have a great day.